This episode of eHealth Radio is brought to you by uNatural, empowering your health. No matter the season or reason, Breathe by uNatural makes it easier to do just that. Our super simple, no-nonsense formula helps improve the function and health of your lungs naturally. A time-tested supplement formulated specifically for sinus, nasal, and lung support. Breathe in. Enter eHealth 15 at checkout for 15% off at uNatural.com. Again, that's eHealth 15 for 15% off at eUNatural.com.
This is the eHealth Radio Network, your source for health advice on demand. And now your host, Eric Michaels.
Thanks for joining us once again here on the eHealth Radio Network. This is your host, Eric Michaels. eHealth Radio gives you the most current health information, news, and advice featuring some of the leading innovators in healthcare and wellness who are changing healthcare as we know it. For more eHealth Radio reports, we invite you to visit our main radio channel site at eHealthRadioNetwork.com. Today we're speaking with Erin Khar, an author from New York City whose debut memoir, Strung Out, One Last Hit and Other Lies That Nearly Killed Me, tackles the issues that many people face as they travel the road of addiction recovery. She has dedicated her life to shining light on these issues and helping others find their way to sobriety, especially in the face of adversity. And Erin, thanks for joining us here today on eHealth Radio.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
And certainly do appreciate your time, Erin, and thanks for coming out. So tell us, for starters, what challenges are people who have addiction issues encountering during the pandemic especially?
Well, I think unfortunately, for a lot of issues and certainly for addiction, the pandemic has exacerbated a lot of those triggers and a lot of the contributing factors to addiction: isolation, lack of community, depression over what's happening on a personal level and a global level. And for people who are in early recovery and maybe relying on 12-step support groups or other sorts of in-person meetings, that loss of face-to-face time is devastating.
Yeah, certainly can understand the lack of face-to-face time being a problem in these regards. Now, Erin, where and how do you think that people could find help at this time when people are unable to even gather for meetings or counseling?
Well, the good thing is that, we're lucky that this is happening in the age of internet. I've thought about this so many times that had this been happening when I was a teenager in the early 90s, it wouldn't have been the same. We had just started getting into the internet. We didn't have the same kind of connections that we have now available to us. So most support meetings, including 12-step meetings, they both have online and phone meetings available. So that would be via Zoom or by phone. That is a great way to stay connected to people. I think that the biggest thing that anyone in early recovery or who is struggling with addiction faces is that isolation, is that lack of connection to community. So any way that you can stay connected to people is going to be really, really important. Even for somebody like myself, I have been drug-free for 17 years. In the first couple of months of the pandemic, it was so bad here in New York City, and I had a lot of anxiety and depression and I didn't feel like I was in danger of using drugs, but I felt so unstable in a way that I hadn't in a very long time. And because I have enough time of recovery, I know what tools I have available to me, and that's reaching out to the people in my own support circle. People who are in early recovery don't necessarily have those automatic tools that they reach for.
Yeah, you made a good point. Imagine this going on some 20 years ago. Yeah, that would make a huge difference, the lack of technology and connections online. Great point once again. Now, how can loved ones help from a distance?
I think the number one thing that we can do for people is staying in contact with them. Even if we know that somebody we love is in active addiction, cutting off communication is not the answer. That doesn't mean that we have to enable them, but we need to let people know that connection is still there, that they still have somebody there who sees them, who sees the human underneath the addiction, right? Because that's what addiction is. It is a human condition. So keeping people who are struggling aware that they have that support is so important. And it can be very challenging when we have people in our lives who are struggling with addiction, because there are behaviors around addiction that can feel very destructive and disruptive. So it's about setting boundaries, but keeping that contact, checking in on people. I had a friend who had a relapse during the pandemic, and I just knew that there was something going on, and I kept checking in with her. And now she is back in recovery, and it wasn't a big slip, but this has been a very slippery, dangerous time for people. And there, in the last few weeks, there have been several articles that have talked about statistically that opioid overdoses are up by over 40% in a lot of states, and simultaneously states are slashing their budgets for services to help people. So it's a really, really tricky time. Any way that we can show up for people that we know who are struggling, to be an ear, to remind them that we love them, and to let them know that they have that community is really the greatest thing we can do for someone.
Erin, really good to have you on, especially during the pandemic, to cover addiction and addiction recovery. So helpful. The name says it all. Breathe. U Natural's potent lung support supplement made by medical and herbal professionals makes it easier to do just that. Formulated for sinus, nasal, and immune health. Save 15% off with eHealth 15 at unatural.com. Try it risk-free for 90 days with code, again, eHealth 15 at EUNatural.com. Today we're speaking with Erin Khar, an author from New York City whose debut memoir, Strung Out, One Last Hit and Other Lies That Nearly Killed Me, tackles the issues that many people face as they travel the road of addiction recovery. And she's joined us here today on eHealth Radio's Addiction Prevention and Health News channels, a part of the eHealth Radio Network. Now, Erin, continuing on, what's your personal advice for people facing addiction issues, and what has helped you personally to remain clean all these years?
The number one thing, and this is sort of a cliche, but the number one thing was getting honest, not just with other people, but with myself. And I was so afraid of people knowing the whole truth. Even once people knew that I had had a problem, I spent a decade hiding it. Once people knew I had a problem and I kept relapsing, I had so much shame there and was so afraid that if people knew all of it, that they wouldn't love me, right? That's sort of that base fear. As I started becoming more and more honest with other people, it gave me freedom from that shame. And it seems counterintuitive when you're in the middle of it, but walking through it and facing sort of the truth gives you such a freedom, because there isn't anything else that's sort of hanging over like a shadow over you. That's the number one thing. The second thing is, and this goes hand in hand with like that honesty, is asking for help. I think that there are a lot of people who are in active addiction that go unnoticed if they are good at hiding it, if they look like they have it together. That was the case for me for a really long time. And you're not going to get help if you don't ask for it. It's a very scary thing to do, but taking those sort of like initial steps of like honesty and just asking for help are those first steps there. In terms of what has kept me off of drugs for 17 years, it's about that long-term aftercare. No one is going to go to rehab for 28 days and then come out and bam, their problems are solved. That initial period of sobriety is really about kind of landing back into your body, landing back in reality. For me, it was a combination of things. It was addressing my mental health issues. It was therapy, which was talk therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy, so that I learned new coping mechanisms that I didn't have. And it was about a spiritual journey for myself, and that's going to look different for different people. But I needed to find ways to be comfortable in my body again and not feel like I was constantly wanting to leave reality and leave my mind and my body. We're all works in progress. These are things that I think that we work on for our entire lives, and giving ourselves the grace to not do it perfectly is another part of it. I had a lot of the sort of like perfectionism complex where if I had slipped in some way in my recovery, it would always lead to this full-blown relapse because if I wasn't doing it perfectly, then I just couldn't do it at all. And this all or nothing sort of thinking doesn't serve us well. So I think that's another big part of it, was sort of accepting that I'm not going to do this perfectly, and accepting that, like, even being drug-free, that I might make a lot of mistakes that I feel badly about, and then I have to learn from them and move forward. So it's all practice, right? It's time and practice, allowing ourselves the grace of not doing it perfectly, and making our mental health and our spiritual health a priority, because it's as important as our physical health.
It certainly is, and Erin, really appreciate your sharing that from a personal perspective, especially on the advice on those that are facing these addiction issues and what has helped you personally to remain clean, and really appreciate your input. I'm sure the listeners have found that most helpful. Now, there's a movement now called Dry July, which happened last month. How can people manage to carry sobriety beyond this 1 month of July?
There have been movements like this, often at the beginning of the year, and there's a term that's going around called, like, sober curious, and I think that there's nothing wrong with that. I think that sometimes people need to have, like, a finite time around it to say, like, let me try this on and see if this works for me. What happens when I take away the alcohol? What happens when I take away whatever substance it is? Now, I think that if somebody is in they've tried out Dry July and they're noticing with the absence of the substance, that the substance is a problem, then I think it's time to look at the things that I was just talking about in terms of, what areas of my life are supporting sobriety or hindering it. And I think that often, most people who struggle with an addiction also have areas in their spiritual life and their mental health life that need addressing. So I think it's looking at those, like, what's the one step I can take today to take care of myself? Is it that I need an hour to myself and I'm going to go for a walk, even with a mask on, and take that time to maybe just listen to some music and let myself clear my head? Is it that I'm going to take a longer shower? Is it that I need to get up a little bit earlier to have that time for myself? Is it that I need to go to yoga or meditate or go to a house, to have like some sort of spiritual practice? Whatever that looks like for you, I think it's finding the thing that brings you that connection with yourself, with God, with the universe, with the people around you, finding that way to sort of ground yourself again and again and again. And when we get in the practice of doing that on a daily basis, it becomes easier and easier.
Erin, again, thanks so much for joining us here today on eHealth Radio. Really appreciate all the information shared with us today. Of course, your book is titled Strung Out, One Last Hit and Other Lies That Nearly Killed Me. I'm sure listeners want to know how they can not only find the book online to pick it up or to get more information on yourself. Where's the best place to do so?
Sure. So the book is available wherever books are sold, your favorite independent bookstore, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, really everywhere that you Target, anywhere you can buy a book, it's available. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, I have a weekly advice column as well. People write into me. It's erinkhar.com, just my name.
And I've already been on the website, a lot of resources for you listeners. Again, Erin, all the best, and thanks so much for joining us here today on eHealth Radio. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.
And you're more than welcome. We've been speaking with Erin Khar, an author from New York City whose debut memoir, Strung Out, One Last Hit and Other Lies That Nearly Killed Me, tackles the issues that many people face as they travel the road of addiction recovery. Erin continues to speak out on these important topics on her popular weekly advice column, Ask Erin, as well as personal essays appearing in Self, Marie Claire, Salon, HuffPost, Esquire, Cosmopolitan, and other publications. And you can also follow her on social media at Erin Khar for more. And once again, the website of reference is, again, erinkhar.com. Again, this has been your host, Eric Michaels, and we do thank you for your continued support of the eHealth Radio Network. Join us again soon for another episode that will help further expand your knowledge on those things that are important to your health and wellness. For more eHealth Radio reports, we invite you to visit our main radio channel site at eHealthRadioNetwork.com. And as always, we do thank you for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in to the eHealth Radio Network. For more information or to subscribe to this podcast, visit eHealthRadioNetwork.com.
This episode of eHealth Radio was brought to you by UNatural, empowering your health. The name says it all. Breathe. UNatural's potent lung support supplement made by medical and herbal professionals makes it easier to do just that. Formulated for sinus, nasal, and immune health. Save 15% off with eHealth 15 at unatural.com. Try it risk-free for 90 days with code eHealth 15 at eunatural.com.